If you were born between 1965 and 1980, welcome, you are a part of Generation X. As you've probably noticed in a couple of videos, I've talked about what life after Jim Crow was like, and I want you to understand that even being raised in that area, in that environment, is very different. So with that, let's talk about today about what it was like growing up and surviving and being raised after Jim Crow. For purposes of Jim Crow, most people point to 1970 as effectively the dividing line between when old historic Jim Crow actually ended and when we moved into this new desegregated integrated society. In part, a lot of that had to do with the fact of the famous Civil Rights Act of 64, the Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, and the Fair Housing Act of 68. By this time, a lot of schools had already started desegregating in response to Brown v. Board. But imagine a situation where you've come up from a specific standpoint where you've grown up in a segregated society where there were very clear rules about where you could and couldn't go and dangers that you had to be acutely aware of, to now a desegregated environment where a lot of those things are not as overt, but there are still some challenges and dangers that you need to raise your child to be prepared for that may not be readily visible. So this was the unique challenge that a lot of parents who are raising kids, especially Black Generation X kids in the South, had to face and reckon with. It's also important to remember that the Black churches was also a community hub. Now, let's just be clear. Most of us are fully aware of the fact of the role of the Black church, especially during the Civil Rights movement. These were places where we organized. These were places where they were safe havens. These were places where they would rally individuals for marches. Post Jim Crow, it also takes on an added importance. It's a community hub as well. So what ended up happening was the church took on a greater significance in terms of not only being a place of worship and a place of faith and all the other civil liberties and civil rights things that they did. It also became a place where it was a community hub, especially for young people, so that we could maneuver within each other's communities in a manner that made us feel safe. Most of us have heard the phrase, "it takes a village." But I don't know if you really appreciate the impact of what that statement means in a particular context. For me, growing up as Generation X, it meant three things. One, any adult within your circle could discipline you. If they knew your family and they knew your people, they could discipline you if you did something wrong. Two, they could call you out. In other words, if they saw something that you weren't supposed to do, they could put the wheels in motion to notify the powers that be that you were up to no good. And number three, they had the right to tell your parents. Now, for most of us who went through that experience, we probably don't have fond memories of that time. But in retrospect, it was a powerful reminder of a few things that we didn't really take in consideration. It let us know that there were people around who were watching out for our safety. They were there to make sure that we did not do anything that put ourselves in harm's way, and they were there to serve as a surrogate to correct any behavior that they believed was inappropriate because they were operating on behalf of our family. It also let us know that we were not just merely going to have to worry about one individual. It's one thing if you worry about your mom or your dad. It's another thing when you have to worry about every adult that you interact with may possibly could step in and take a particular course of action to correct whatever thing that you're doing. Remember, one of the things that we often don't take in consideration is that coming out of Jim Crow, that there was still not clearly defined areas in terms of knowing where the safe places were and where the places weren't safe in terms of where they were previously. But the reality is that there were still people who still had hostilities from Jim Crow, and they carried them into this new period of time. So for us who remember Generation X who had never experienced these, unlike our parents who had dealt with this on a regular basis, the adults took an extra measure to ensure that they kept us on the straight and narrow so that we would never do anything that would put ourselves in harm's way or do anything that would result in being a justification to put us in harm's way. If you grew up in the same town as your parents and ended up going through school in the same town as your parents, I'm going to tell you about a phenomenon that is probably familiar with you. I know your people. That was a phenomenon that I, as well as many of my classmates, experienced. At every juncture of our educational experience, you almost invariably were going to run into an adult, meaning a teacher, who was going to look at you, look at your name, look at your facial expressions, and then play the I know your people game, where they are just determined to figure out who they know. That was an important thing. It meant a free flowing amount of intel. So that means at each particular point, you had someone who not only knew your people, but they also did not have to wait on your people to come and contact them. They could contact them directly. That was the nature of what it meant to say, I know your people. All those people calling you out, they were calling you out to let you know that there was an infrastructure available around you who were going to keep an eye on you to make sure you were safe. Part of the reason why I'm having these discussions and having this series about this is because a lot of times we've talked about history with relations to the baby boomers and everything that they've done. And then we've kind of jumped over Generation X to go to the millennials and Gen Zers and Gen Alphas, mainly because the younger generation now have such access to technology and different things, and they're living in this new world order in a manner where they have a fully realized, desegregated, integrated society. However, there had to be a generation that had to undergo through that transitional period of time. Yes, there were quite a few baby boomers who had the opportunity to experience the transition from Jim Crow into this desegregated society. There was a generation of us that still had to go through and maneuver through a particular environment in a manner. And our parents who grew up in that tumultuous, traumatizing, rough period of the Jim Crow period, as well as the liberation of civil rights and so forth, they had to figure out how they were going to maneuver their children in such a way so that they could protect them against this new world that neither they or their children had ever experienced. And so what they did is they relied on a lot of the same tools that they utilized during their upbringing to allow for an opportunity to protect us during ours. But I know these aren't all of them. I bet you probably have some unspoken rules too about what it was like growing up at Generation X, Black Generation X. It could be in your area of the country or in the South. Take a moment, please comment. Let me know. I love to hear about them. And more importantly, if there's one topic about it that I've missed and you're like, hey, you didn't talk about this, let people know about this, what it was like in Generation X. Let me know. Be more than happy to address it. Thank you very much for taking the time for tuning in. As always, take the opportunity. Share with me if you have any other unspoken rules about what it was like being Black Generation X growing up in your neck of the woods. This is part of my series, not only acknowledging Generation X. I can't speak to any other ethnicities' experiences, whether it be Asian, Native, Indigenous, or even white. I'm sharing it from my standpoint, being a member of Black Generation X. And for those of you who are like, when were you born? I said 1969, so I'm one of the older Generation X. I want to make sure that people realize that this was a time that, yes, we celebrate all the great things that happened, whether it be the MTVs, the BETs, the VH1s, all of the awesome things that came around with it. But there was also a period of time where we were going through history in real time, and we were the gateway bridge between the millennials who were truly entrenched in the desegregated society and then the baby boomers who experienced a lot of the trauma and went through all the fighting to create opportunities that we could benefit from. As always, I'm Tony Reeves. Thank you for tuning in. Look forward to you. But hey, make sure you like, make sure you share, make sure you subscribe. Take care.